Okay, do I click it now?
No.
It's on, okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm sure you're looking forward to a slow speech. I will slow down. So Frederick asked me to speak yesterday, so I thought I would give you a bit of a slice of life experience from my time, is that fast? My time in the police, because I've been thinking a lot recently about liberty, the pursuit of happiness and the social contract, as I did when I was in the police. And I thought I'd go through this in two different segments. The first segment will be a bit about general reflection about the role of the police in society and the way in which society is changing because of the current situation in the world and the way the police are reacting to this, and talk to you a little bit about the mentality of policemen, which you perhaps don't know too much about, because I hope you don't. And the second half, after the break, I'll talk to you about the two big events that led to my resigning from the UK police, which were big social movements involving civil liberties and all sorts of things like that. Anyway, so the first half is just general thinking about the social contract. Now, when I joined the police straight out of university, I was 23. I had no idea how the world worked, and I thought I had some street wisdom, but I hadn't none at all, because I had led a very sheltered life in Cambridge University doing my master's and my doctorate, and then I went to the police, and that was a completely different world, a completely different environment, and the scales really fell from my eyes. I trust somebody got the biblical allusion there. If you didn't, you'll be punished. So when the scales fell from my eyes, I realised that in a civilised society, or indeed the UK, if you can't find one, you need a social contract. The social contract being that people will give up certain of their liberties to in exchange for freedom and security and social security and the safety net which surrounds us in Western Europe. So it's a contract, a bargain between the electorate and the government to put in place police services. In fact, if I could open a parenthesis, as I tend to do, I've just finished about 10 minutes ago on the way here reading a book called The Gods of Gotham, and it's all about the first police force in New York in the 1850s. When they created the police, they were called the Copper Stars, which is where the word copper comes from today, a policeman being called a copper. And it was very interesting to see the situation in New York, which was a totally lawless society with thousands and thousands of Irish people arriving every day at the time of the famous Irish potato famine, and the way in which the government tried to start instituting the rule of law, and doing so via a police force. And no one was qualified, no one knew what they were doing. It's a very interesting book. I encourage you to read it if you get the chance. Anyway, closing the parenthesis to come back to my experience of policing, I think people give up freedom to an extent, and there has to be a balance achieved in a civilised society, to my mind, between how much freedom you give up and how much you get in exchange for that renouncing your freedom. I think now the balance is tipping much too far on the side of giving up individual liberties. Again, that's one of the reasons probably I ended up leaving the police, because I didn't really agree with the way in which the social contract was being interpreted by the UK police at the time. I joined in 1979, before any of you here were born, I'm sure. I was 23, and just before I joined, Margaret Thatcher came to power. Now that was one of the big components in the way I experienced the police, because Margaret Thatcher bestrode the narrow world of the UK like a colossus. And if you get the Shakespeare allusion there, you're doing well as well. So that's Shakespeare and the Bible now. Anyway, she actually, just before I arrived, she increased the pay of the British police by 25%, which the police are very happy about, including myself. But that should have triggered some alarm bells in the head of anybody who thinks about the way in which society is run. Why would she need to increase the salary of the police by a quarter, would you think? It occurred to me after a few short months in the police that, of course, the reason she was doing that was that she had plans for the country. And her plans for the country, she knew, were going to be most unpopular. Any dictator or anybody coming into power who's going to try and do things to the populace that the populace will object to is going to have the police force on their side. And so that was how she got the police on her side, by paying them a lot more money. I suppose I was lucky in that it coincided with my joining the police. During my time in the police, I experienced virtually everything, because I was what they called a graduate entrant. Now, the graduate entry programme at the time was in response to criticisms of the British police where they were being criticised for not having enough thinkers in the police. And so they said, what we'll try and do is we'll recruit some graduates from university. I gather that's a good thing, they thought. And so I was a graduate entrant, which meant I was on an accelerated promotion scheme, which meant I tasted all the different facets of the police. It was very interesting. I started off on foot patrol, because as you probably know in the UK, every policeman has to do 2 years of foot patrol. Because it isn't like in Europe, I say Europe advisedly because we are not European, it isn't like in Europe where the police are structured along paramilitary lines, and that's why the ranks are completely different. So I started off as a constable. Constable is the bottom rank. They're the ones who wear the helmets. And you perhaps don't realise that in the UK, the whole principle of policing is what they call policing by consent. So you are deemed to, hello Arno, to police by the consent of the public. And that consent is very important, and the rank of constable is something that goes back to the Middle Ages in the UK. The UK, as you know, is run by the principle of common law as opposed to Napoleonic law, and enshrined in common law is the fact that a constable is first and foremost a citizen. So it was drummed into our heads during our training courses that we were first and foremost and always citizens. So we weren't there to do things to the people, we were there to do things with the people. Now that changed. I'll come to that in the second half of my talk. So I did my 2 years on the beat as a bobby. Then I moved into the CID. The CID, as you may or may not know, is the Criminal Investigation Division, which is the equivalent of the police judiciaire in Belgium or France. They're the people in civilian clothes who do all the inquiries on major crime. That was extremely interesting. I also then moved to something which is even more specialised, which is called the Regional Crime Squad. Now, the Regional Crime Squad is what the French call l'anti-gang. They deal with all the organised crime, basically. Murder, trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, the big violent crimes. That was very interesting as well, although it was a bit scary. When I was in the Regional Crime Squad, I was armed most of the time, but the British police are not armed, as you know, systematically. Most of the British police now can carry arms. They do have training to shoot, but they don't tend to be armed systematically. In the Regional Crime Squad we were, because the work was quite dangerous there. Then I spent a year in the drug squad. That was very interesting as well. I got to taste lots of different strains of marijuana. So I always recognise the different smells in the street now, the different sorts. That was very interesting. Then the most fun bit for me, because as you know I'm a racing driver, was traffic department. And I was in that for a couple of years. That was great fun. Because if you think about it, how many people in the world are paid to drive as fast as they can? Well, professional racing drivers and policemen. And that was a lot of fun. And I was very good at that because I'm a good driver. I always got everywhere first. But that wasn't a good thing necessarily, because you soon learn in the police that to get there first is not necessarily a good thing, because you tend to get attacked. So when you hear there's something nasty going on, or going down as the Americans would say, as Pauline would say, you make sure you don't get there first. So I learned to drive just as fast, but to wait 5 minutes until the next car arrived, and then come in just after the first car. Anyway, let's come back to the whole idea of the social contract. It became clear to me that the reason the police exist is not that which I thought. I thought that police were there to make the world a better place and to protect the weak against the strong, which is why I joined. But sadly, it's the opposite. The police are actually there to protect the strong against the weak. I used to use the image when I was talking about this of a pressure cooker. A pressure cooker with the police sitting on the lid. And that meant all the foment in society and all the struggles and the hatred and the violence and the disgruntlement, all that was bubbling away inside the pressure cooker, and the police were there to stop the top blowing off, so it would inconvenience the people who actually were in charge of the country. And that meant, of course, that the police are like a sort of buffer zone between the real world and the world of the decision makers, and the bourgeois people, the nice society. Because that, to me, is not so much the real world. The real world, to me, on a very gritty scale, is what we used to see every day in the police. Because that's the reality for more people than is the opposite. So I didn't like that role. As I became aware that we were there to be used as a tool to stop the nice parts of society being polluted by the nasty parts, I didn't think that was the right way to approach running a civilized society. Now, the good thing about the police is that you can make a difference immediately. And for somebody who wants to make a difference in the world, as I still do, I'm sure you will do too, it is quite gratifying, because very frequently you could make a difference there and then on the spot. But of course, the flip side of that is that the law is cruel. For the law, things are binary. Either you're guilty or you're not guilty. It's black or it's white. And it became very clear to me over the years of policing, as I rose up the ranks to the rank of chief inspector, which is like a commissaire principal in French, it became very clear to me that people are not black and white. Crimes don't tend to happen because people are purely evil or purely good. People get overcome by events, they make a mistake. If, say, you're an old age pensioner and you have no food and you're cold and you haven't eaten for 2 days, you go and steal a tin of beans. Now, is that a morally bad thing? To me, it's not a morally bad thing. To me, that's a moral failing on the part of society that can't feed its pensioners. But I was told to arrest those people, and I don't think that's acceptable. I didn't want to continue being the armed fist of a regime that I thought was cruel, because the law is cruel, trust me. Another thing that became very clear to me, and I hope I'm not going to make any of you disabused with life, is that justice is purely a fictional notion. The coincidence between justice and the police is a coincidence, nothing more. The whole thing is a game. The justice system is a game. You play the game. Those who play the game well get a lot out of it. Those who play the game badly end up in prison. And to me, that isn't what the word justice means, especially with a big J. So again, these were all factors that started a growing sense of not resentment, but of disappointment in the way in which societies are run. I haven't even got back to the initial premise, which I referred to, of the balance tipping too far on the side of abandonment of civil liberties. I'll do that just for a few seconds now before we have the break. Unless you want me to go on more than 12 minutes, Federica, I can do that. More? Okay, she doesn't want more. But just give me a few seconds to talk about that. As you're aware, of course, because you live in the same world I do, the more terrorist attacks there are and the more a climate of fear is inculcated by the politicians, the more people will accept giving up their freedoms. And the thing is, with law, it's like a ratchet effect. Once you pass laws which reduce people's individual freedoms, you never ever go back. It doesn't happen. Physically, it never ever goes back to how it was before. It's like dictators bringing in emergency powers or states of emergency. They never ever go back. They say they will, they never do. That's my 12 minutes gone. Shall I stop now? I have to stop. See you soon.